Now listen to Zachary K. Tupper. Yeah. Time to wake up and learn the knowledge. Wake the fuck up, radio. Wake the fuck up, radio. Don't be messing with the knowledge. Radio. Don't be hating on the knowledge. Radio. Don't be trolling on the knowledge. Trolls everywhere. Don't be fighting with the knowledge. Radio. WTFU, wake the fuck up. WTFU, wake the fuck up. WTFU, wake the fuck up. Radio.
All right, welcome back, True Seeker. Before we get into this, shout out to Ivan. Ivan submitted that as the latest candidate for the entry song to Wake the Fuck Up Radio. And this episode will be the third broadcast. It is titled, well, it might as well be titled, Let There Be Light, the meaning of 201. And of course, the third verse of the Bible is where it says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. If you missed the first two prior podcasts, you're going to want to go back and check those out. We talked about what this channel is all about in the debut episode. And then in broadcast number 2, we went over the Kabbalistic practice of encoding words with numbers, which is Gematria. And we will be talking about Gematria an awful lot on this program because it's one of the best kept secrets in the world. And it's something that almost no one has heard of, but nearly everyone has been impacted by, whether they realize that or not. And with regards to light, which of course, you know, is the thing that comes from the sun that makes life possible, to the occult, light is also knowledge. And in the original language that involved letters and numbers, or gematria or gematria Hebrew, the number 201 corresponds with both to light, like to light a candle, to bring light to a room, as well as the word to enlighten, which means to impart knowledge. And that's interesting because in English, we know the phrase knowledge is power. So let's make sure we're clear here. In Hebrew, in the study of Gematria, the number 201 pertains to light. Again, like light in a room, like it's light in the daytime, as well as the phrase to enlighten. So 201 pertains to both, and that's in Hebrew. In English, the phrase knowledge is power has a gematria value of 201. And as a refresher, to get that, you just take the alphabetic order. A would be the first letter, B would be the second, C would be the third, up to Z. The 26th letter is 26. So when you write out knowledge is power, K is the first word in knowledge, and K is the 11th letter. So K would be worth 11, and the 14th letter would be 14. Oh, the 15th letter would be 15. You just add up all the letters of knowledge is power. It equates to 201. And you have to begin to ask yourself, well, who would encode the English language? Who would pay this tribute to Hebrew? And it's an interesting question. If you look into the phrase knowledge is power, who it's first credited to, it's credited to Francis Bacon. And if you're not familiar with Francis Bacon, many people believe he was William Shakespeare, which is open for debate. But Francis Bacon was a right-hand man to King James in the time of the 16th century, a brilliant man, an occultist, a wordsmith, and someone who did help edit the King James Bible. As another reminder, last week in episode 2, when we covered Gematria, we talked about how there's 4 base ciphers of the English language. The alphabetic order, A is 1 up to Z is 26. The alphabetic order in reverse, and both orders applying numerology. With regards to Francis Bacon being one of the editors of the King James Bible, it's interesting that the phrase, or not the phrase, but the words, the Holy Bible, when you run the alphabetic order in reverse, the Holy Bible equates to 201. And traditionally, Gematria pertains to the beginning of the Bible, the Torah, or the first 5 books of Moses. The study of Gematria, the numbers behind the words in the Torah, it's considered Jewish mysticism. That phrase, Jewish mysticism, also equates to 201. So far in English, we're talking about knowledge is power, 201, knowledge is light, going back to the old Hebrew root. And again, the study pertains to the Bible, the Holy Bible, 201. And Jewish mysticism. As we'll get to a little bit later, State of Israel, the Jewish nation at this day and age, has that 201. We'll talk more about that in a moment, including David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister, dying 201 days after the anniversary of Israel's establishment. But 201, coming back to who encoded the language this way. Was it just Francis Bacon? Of course, it wasn't just Francis Bacon. Francis Bacon, I'm no doubt, in the key moment in the 16th century, more than likely had a hand in it. Again, if you look into history, in the 16th century, English was standardized as a 26-letter alphabet. The Gregorian calendar rolled out. That's the calendar that says, today, the day of this broadcast, it's March 9th, 2024. But at the same moment, in the 16th century, the language established, the calendar established. As we talked about last week, the calendar and the language very much in sync. And that was the century of the Jesuit order. And interestingly enough, whereas Francis Bacon was a friend of King James, the Jesuits were a foe. And I'm sure you've heard before, remember the 5th of November, made famous in the V for Vendetta movie. But November 5th is the day in history that the Jesuit order tried to kill King James and destroy the idea of the King James Bible being published. The Jesuits served the Catholic Church, and the church didn't want, this English translation of the Bible printed and spread out, I suppose, to the proles, as George Orwell might have called them. But okay, 16th century, 201. The century of the Jesuits. Funny enough, the Jesuit order, just like the Holy Bible, equates to 201. And again, the Jesuits, a priest class, and also the military order of the Catholic Pope. The Jesuit order 201, which ties right in with their founder, Ignatius of Loyola. His name, Ignatius of Loyola, also equates to 201. And if you fast forward to today, we're living in the time of the first ever publicly Jesuit Pope right now, Pope Francis. And he is the first Jesuit Pope and the first to live in Suite 201 at the Vatican. His birth name, Jorge Mario Bergoglio. That's Pope Francis, equates to 201. Jorge Mario Bergoglio, 201. The name of his apartment is called the Domus Sanctae Martyr. It also equates to 201. And that building that he lives in was first built in tribute to Pope Leo, who, funny enough, died in history on the 201st day of the year, July 20th, the anniversary of the moon landing. And if you can believe it, Neil Alden Armstrong equates to 201. And if you think about that, the moon is illuminated, it's lit up by the sun. So the moon landing, the illuminated object, happened on the 201st day of the year. At least so we're told. And that takes us back to the 16th century, because in addition to, Francis Bacon and the King James Bible and the Jesuits and the calendar and the language. The other thing that happened in the 16th century is the heliocentric model was agreed to. The model that says the sun is the center and Earth and the other planets are orbiting around it. Up until that moment in history, there was very much a debate about the sun being the center with everything moving around it. But in the 16th century, it was agreed to that the sun is at the middle. And heliocentrism, the name of the model, equates to 201. Light, again, the source of light is the sun. So doesn't it make sense that the model that says the source of light is the center of it all equates to 201? Again, once you become aware of this, there's a lot of rhyme and reason to history and what's taking place up to this very moment. Okay, coming back to the point about the Jesuits. From the day that Martin Luther, not to be confused with Martin Luther King Jr., but Martin Luther, who led the Protestant Reformation, from the day that he pinned the 95 Theses to Castle Church, from that day to the day that the Jesuit order was created, which was August 15th, 1534 in Paris, France, was 201 months later. 201 months. 201. And mind you, the Jesuits were created in Paris, France. The last pope that was French in the history of the Catholic Church happened to be the 201st pope in the history of the church. Pope Francis is the first publicly Jesuit pope. And for the record, Pope Francis is the 266th pope in the history of the church. The Jesuit motto, Isus hominum salvator, equates to 266. You might recall when he spoke in Washington, D.C., September 23rd, 2015. That was the 266th day of the year. And as we'll get to, the capital city for the U.S., Washington, D.C., is where the Jesuits originally set up camp when they came to the country. Okay, so moving ahead, we've covered the 16th century, the language, the calendar, Francis Bacon, King James, the Bible, the Jesuits. A little bit further into history, May 1st, 1776, 64 days before July 4th, 1776, which celebrated as the birthday of this nation. Jesuit-trained Adam Weishaupt, who was Jewish, founded the Illuminati. And he quickly named the order of Illuminati, which, if you can believe it, equates to 201. And in history, he died November 18th, 1830. That was 201 days after the anniversary of the Illuminati's establishment on May 1st. 201 days. And it's noteworthy that he died on November 18th because that's the 322nd day of the year, 322. That matters because, again, Jewish mysticism equates to 201, and Jewish mysticism is largely based in Kabbalah, and the physical model for Kabbalah is the tree of life, which has 3 pillars and 22 paths, a bit like the 322nd day of the year, and also a lot like Genesis 3:22, which mentions the tree of life and knowing good and evil. And again, in Kabbalah, there is a good half, which is the tree of life, and there's an evil half, which is the clip off. So, the Illuminati then came this country, and interestingly enough, the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court in this nation's history was Chief Justice John Jay. And that title and name equates to 201. And the father of the Constitution was James Madison. James Madison equates to 201. And what's also very noteworthy about James Madison is that while he was the president of the United States, the Jesuit order came out of suppression. The Jesuits were suppressed by the Pope because of essentially as a public relations campaign by the Catholic Church. The Jesuits had created an unfortunate image of themselves. So many rumors, so much speculation about all the wrongdoing the Jesuits were up to in Europe. They were accused of murder and even worse. And the Pope had to separate himself from the order, so they were suppressed, funny enough, for 41 years. But when they came out of suppression, it was in the time of James Madison, the 201 president. And the noteworthy thing about the suppression ending in the early days of America and it lasting 41 years, USA in Gematria, real simple. Use the 21st letter, S is the 19th, A is the first, you put it together, USA is 41. And 41 is the 13th prime number. Again, prime numbers are those that can only be divided by one in themselves. But you think about the USA and 13, from 13 stripes to 13 colonies to 13 years of, as I call it, slave school, where you have a lot of your life taken and not a whole lot to show for it other than knowing trivial information such as Christopher Columbus discovered a land where people already lived. But you might recall in your earliest days of your 13 years of school, you might recall, that border around the top of the classroom that so many classrooms did have in it with the letters and the numbers. A lot of borders with A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, just right up there at the very top of the classroom. And that was one of the first things I thought of when I learned this knowledge. And I thought about how we learned the alphabetic order right away at the youngest of ages. And it never was taught to me, and it probably wasn't taught to you either, that there was ever even a practice of coding numbers into words. But all of a sudden you start to think, no wonder there's an alphabetic order. They didn't just teach us to memorize the letters of the alphabet. They taught us to memorize them in a very specific order. A, B, C, D, E, F. I don't need to do it for you, but again, you get the knowledge and it brings the clarity. Takes you out of the darkness. Okay, so coming back to just this U.S. history of 201. And of course, much of my focus is on what's going on in this nation, since it's where I was born and live to this very day. And it's a place I would like to see get on a much better path than it is right now at this moment as I'm broadcasting. But yes, just moving down the line of U.S. history. So we went back to the very beginning. Chief Justice John Jay, James Madison, the Jesuits coming out of suppression. By the way, if you look into two of the founders who were most concerned about what might happen if the Jesuits came out of suppression before they did, those two were Thomas Jefferson and John Adams. And they penned letters back and forth that are in the National Archive you can look up. And again, those two men just happened to die on the exact same day, July 4th, 1826. And then again, exactly 1826 days later, Monroe died on July 4th, and he also wasn't the biggest fan of the Catholic Church. If you missed last week's broadcast, episode number 2, we really got into the significance of July 4th and what's fateful about those numbers 7 and 4. And why the Ides of March is to remember the killing of Caesar on the 74th day of the year. But okay, moving to more recent history. Jumping ahead to September 18th, 1947. That is the day in history that the CIA was established. And again, CIA stands for Central Intelligence Agency. Some people refer to it as the Catholics in Action, and that's probably not too far from the truth. I'm sure you've likely heard of the fictional character from the Tom Clancy series, Jack Ryan, the Jesuit-educated CIA agent. There's books about him. There's movies about him portrayed by Tom Cruise. There's video game series about him. But Jack Ryan, Jesuit-educated at Boston College, he has a line in one of the books about how Jesuits run the world. They're just humble about it. And it has been said that the CIA is or not the CIA, excuse me, the Jesuit order is truly the greatest intelligence agency and network in the history of the world. But the CIA, again, was established September 18th, 47, on the 201st day of the sitting Pope's age. And fittingly, the words in the Jesuit order's logo, Central Intelligence Agency, United States of America, they equate to 201. Also, if you write out the CIA's motto, which is the work of a nation, the center of intelligence, it also equates to 201. And to rewind a few years before that, the first inauguration in the nation's history on January 20th was with FDR in 1937. He became the first president to be inaugurated on January 20th. What's so interesting about January 20th is it can be written 20/1 like 201. And it's also the 201st day of the nation's age each year. When you measure from July 4th to January 20th, that's the 201st day of the nation's age. And if you want to take a look at the US government website, that day is officially titled Inauguration of the President of the United States, which equates to 201. 201. And one more time, there are 4 base ciphers: alphabetic order in reverse, and both orders with numerology. So these are the 4 base ciphers. That's how a longer phrase can have a 201 value, and a single word can also have a 201 value, such as, say, heliocentrism, or even a word like Confederate. If you want to take a step back in history even further, Abraham Lincoln blamed the American Civil War on the Jesuit order. Yeah, look that up. Lincoln wrote a lot about the Jesuits. He said at the beginning of the war, he didn't even realize who the Jesuits were, but by the end of the war, he'd realized they'd instigated the whole thing. And we'll talk about that in light of January 6th. Actually, let's just do it right now. Remember, George Floyd, the man killed by Derek Chauvin on the corner of 38th Street in Minnesota. He was reportedly killed on Memorial Day, and Memorial Day came out of the American Civil War. Memorial Day came out of the American Civil War. George Floyd, his name was protested for his killing in Europe alongside the name of Gematria, who was killed in Paris, France, the home of the Jesuits, in similar fashion by the police. And Gematria was killed in the leap year in 2016. He was killed on July 19th, which in a leap year is the 201st day of the year. And he was killed exactly 201 weeks before George Floyd was killed. And George Floyd's full name, George Perry Floyd, equates to 201. And you might recall George Washington's baby mama was part of the story. Her name, Roxy Washington, equates to 201. You might even recall that George Washington was arrested for a fake $20 bill using a counterfeit 20. And it was just days after the Skull and Bones member Steve Mnuchin had said that they're not going to do the Harriet Tubman $20 bill anymore. So they're going to postpone that project for at least 8 years. Harriet Tubman also equates to 201, and she's also part of the Civil War history. Underground Railroad. But George Floyd, there were so many 201s in the ritual. One of the first people interviewed in Minnesota after he was killed was a man who was supposedly beaten by the same group of police officers. His name was Lamar Ferguson. If you want to go back and look, Lamar Ferguson, 201. And hearing his name probably reminds you of what happened in Ferguson, Missouri, where Black Lives Matter popped off after the Michael Brown killing. Michael Brown, 201. And that was right next to St. Louis, which is a major Jesuit stronghold, as we'll get to in a moment when we talk about Tom Brady and where he factors in being born 201 years after the Illuminati and the nation, and once married to Giselle, born on the 201st day of the year. But 201, George Floyd, Civil War. After the George Floyd killing, there were riots all across the nation, and a lot of Confederate statues were torn down. And if they weren't torn down, they ended up being taken down by the cities themselves. And you might recall the only Confederate statue in Washington, D.C. was that of Albert Pike. Albert Pike, the Freemason, very important Freemason to the nation's history. By the way, Albert Pike's birthday is December 29th, 1229. The number 1229 is the 201st prime. But the Albert Pike statue was torn down in Washington, D.C. on June 19th, a year to the day of Juneteenth becoming an official holiday. And it matters because from the day that that Confederate statue was torn down in D.C. to the day of January 6th was exactly 201 days later. Exactly 201 days. And that day, the Confederate flag flew through the Capitol. We've seen the same footage over and over for years now since it happened. The Confederate flag often shown in it. Bill Maher speculated that we're not too far off from another civil war in America's history. In fact, we're just about a month or so away from a movie coming out about a future U.S. Civil War being put out by Alex Garland. And if you go back and look, when the trailer first debuted for this new Civil War movie, it came out exactly 201 days after Alex Garland's birthday. Exactly 201 days. Of course, January 6th was 2 weeks before Biden officially took office. And if you weren't here at the time, obviously you weren't listening to this podcast because it didn't exist. But again, I've been on YouTube since 2013, putting out content every day. We were talking about more than a year in advance why Joe Biden was going to be elected number 46, exactly 46 weeks after the Pope's birthday, in tribute to JFK's assassination at age 46. In Gematria, Catholic equals 46. They're the only two Catholic presidents to date. But also in tribute to the death of his son, Beau Biden, who died at age 46, May 30th, 2015. And if you go back and look, you'll see that Beau Biden died exactly 201 days before Pope Francis's birthday. 201 days on the nose. And you'll also see, if you look into it, that the Jesuit priest who did the funeral for Beau Biden also did the inauguration for Joe Biden. Beau Biden dead at 46. Keep in mind, Beau's real name is Joe as well. He's Joe Biden Jr., but they called him Beau Biden. So Joe Biden Jr. dies at 46, and then Joe Biden's inaugurated as number 46. Same Jesuit priest involved in both rituals. And Leo Jeremiah O'Donovan. He used to be the head of Georgetown. His name in Gematria, Leo Jeremiah O'Donovan, equates to 201. You look into the Jesuit history, you'll find the 201s everywhere. I'm out here in Washington State. Gonzaga, major Jesuit school known for its basketball program in recent decades, named after Aloysius de Gonzaga, whose name, of course, equals 201. There's such a long list, we're not going to hit anywhere near all of them. The point of this broadcast is to make sure people understand the significance of this number, where it comes from, and what order is using it. Again, the Illuminati, which means in the light, is using it. These are the people that are in the light. They're in the knowledge. They're enlightened. They're aware of things such as this and more that go back, really to the beginning of time. Sumer, Babylon, they say that's where this whole Kabbalah thing came out of. But most people, they don't have a clue. And they don't see what's taking place right in front of their face day after day. To rewind about the Jesuits in 201, the way you can see that it's more than just the numbers behind the language, if you look into the Jesuit history, you'll see that their order was preserved by Catherine the Great, who preserved the order with 201 Jesuit priests. 201. That was in the time of the Jesuit suppression. The order saved with 201 Jesuit priests. And it makes you go, well, was there really 201, or are they just reporting that for the symbolism of the number? Just like how the first Jesuit Pope is the first to live in Suite 201 at the Vatican. Since we're bringing up Catherine the Great, who was the leader of Russia, You might recall Hulu put out a show about her, a comedy at the beginning of the pandemic. And of course, the pandemic was simulated a month before it began with Event 201, or it was simulated October 18th, 2019, the same day the military world games began in Wuhan, China. And again, if you look into those military world games, you'll find that they're credited to the Jesuit order, and they began in the year 95 in Italy, kind of like how the Jesuits' original mission was to stop Martin Luther and the 95 Theses. And that's why they were recognized by Rome on September 27th, the day leaving 95 days left in the year. But since we're bringing up Russia in Ukraine, Biden met with Vladimir Putin just before the Russia-Ukraine war began. And again, the Russia-Ukraine war began on February 24th, the day in history that the Gregorian calendar was first implemented. February 24th is the day the Gregorian calendar was first implemented, and the calendar was given to us by the Jesuit priest Christopher Clavius. But Biden and Putin met, of all days, on Pearl Harbor Day to discuss the escalating situation between Russia and Ukraine. And the funny thing about them meeting on Pearl Harbor Day is that it was exactly 201 days after the first ever Jesuit Ignatian year had been declared. And it was declared May 20th, 2021, which was the 500th anniversary of Ignatius of Loyola being shot with a cannonball. And look into the death of Billy Cannon on that day in history, the same day that Joe Burrow transferred from Ohio State to LSU. The year that Joe Burrow went to the Super Bowl in the playoffs, he played all four teams that Billy Cannon played against, and both men played at LSU and won the championship in New Orleans over Clemson, and they're the only two LSU players to win the Heisman. But also later this year, right as of right now, Trump still has a court date scheduled for May 20th. Again, that's Ignatius of Loyola getting shot with a cannonball day, the Jesuit founder. But he has a court date right now with Eileen Cannon. And of course, Donald Trump's Jesuit educated, as we'll get to in a moment. Talk more about why his ex-wife was buried on the 201st day of the year. It's right up there with what happened to Joe Biden's wife and daughter years ago, and more recently to Beau Biden. But yeah, this Russia-Ukraine thing. When the war began with Russia and Ukraine, it began in the Donbass region, which also equates to 201. And if you want to look into the leader of the United Nations right now, his name is escaping me. His name does equate to 201, the leader of the United Nations. But if you go back and look, he went to Ukraine near the start of the war, and the big headline was that day that bombs, artillery was exploding in close proximity. Again, part of the advantage of being aware of this knowledge is you can see just what a stage the world is. You know, that phrase, the world is a stage. Political theater, the theater of war. You've heard all these phrases. Once you learn this knowledge, you see the way the theater unfolds, and you can understand who is pulling the strings. You don't have to ask, is there an Illuminati anymore? It's very obvious there is. They're working by the same code they've been working by for centuries. And, you know, case in point, State of Israel equates to 201. It was created after the world wars that followed similar patterns. So what's unfolding now with Russia and Ukraine, and even more recently, Israel? Remember, Netanyahu stepped down on June 13th, the day leaving 201 days left in the year. Then he returned on December 29th, 2022. Again, 1229 is the 201st prime, like the State of Israel equates to 201. And, you know, he came back and with some sharp rhetoric. And I put out a video on my YouTube channel that very day pointing out that no doubt war was coming in the next year with Israel, why the year 2023 mattered, and why he was returning on Albert Pike's birthday, who wrote a letter about 3 world wars to come. The third was to be centered on political Zionism. Again, if you look into Albert Pike's letter about 3 world wars, it was published in history on August 15th, which is the day the Jesuit order was created in Paris, France. And that letter was addressed to Mazzini, who was the second leader of the Illuminati after Adam Weishaupt. Regarding the Illuminati, there was something I meant to touch on that I forgot to. When you think of the Illuminati, you commonly think of the eye as their symbol. The other symbol that they're associated with is the pyramid. And the most famous pyramid in the world is the Great Pyramid of Giza. And funny enough, Great Pyramid of Giza equates to 201 in Gematria. And if you look it up, it wasn't this way originally, but as it stands right now, there's 201 remaining layers of stone. 201 remaining layers of stone. If I'm not mistaken, I think there was originally 210, and the 9 top layers have been removed one way or another. And again, some people claim that, just like how the nose got blown off the Sphinx, some people claim that Napoleon of France, where the Jesuits are from, used some of the Egyptian monuments for target practice. So was Napoleon given an assignment to blow off, the remaining layers of stone to get it down to 201? If anybody has an answer to how it got down to 201, I am all ears. Okay. So just so you know, I'm mostly doing this podcast just off the top. I have a little list of notes written down here, just things to hit, just for my own sake and also possibly for you. So far, we've covered the meaning of 201 in Hebrew, the connection with 201 in English and the English translations of the Bible, and the phrase knowledge is power, and where that fits in with Francis Bacon and Jewish mysticism. We talked about how in the 16th century, it was the century of the Jesuits, who are the most 201 thing on earth. Again, most recently, they had the Event 201 simulation put on by the Jesuit Klaus Schwab, simulating the pandemic right before it happened, 1 month before the outbreak in Wuhan. And by the way, that lab leak theory, if you look into that lab leak theory, the lab in Wuhan, with all the speculation, was built by the French. Again, that's where the Jesuits are from. Let's not forget that this nation in the US, a lot of the founders studied in France. Or that L'Enfant, the French Freemason, laid out Washington, D.C. Okay, we also talked about Martin Luther pinning the 95 Theses, the Jesuits being created 201 months later. I should mention, Martin Luther pinned the 95 Theses, and Martin Luther King Jr., who assumed the name after Martin Luther, ended up getting assassinated on the 95th day of 1968. This year, 2024, Martin Luther King Jr., if he were alive, would have turned 95. One Monday, 1 week after his birthday, his son died after his 95th birthday. If you go back in history, too, you'll see that MLK's supposed assassin, he died 95 days after MLK Day that year. Again, the Jesuits' original mission to counter the 95 Theses. The military world games credited to the Jesuits in 95. We're going to talk about in just a moment what happened in 95 at the Oklahoma City Federal Building on April 19th, which is the anniversary of Ignatius of Loyola becoming the first Jesuit superior general as recognized by the church. It's also the day in history the American Revolutionary War began. It's also the day Waco happened. It's also the day Canada lost its gun rights. It's a fateful day throughout history, April 19th. Okay, so we talked about 201, 16th century, where the heliocentric model fit in, how that tied in with the moon landing, the illuminated object in the sky. We talked about 201 in the Illuminati, 201 in the pyramids, 201 in key moments in U.S. history, from Chief Justice John Jay to James Madison to Inauguration Day to the CIA. Let's talk about Oklahoma City, April 19th, 1995. And I remember that just being one of the strangest days of my life. I was a young person then. Again, I was born in 83. So I was 11 years old, almost 12. I would have turned 12 later that year, July 21st. But we were having a big windstorm that day out in the Pacific Northwest where I live. Destructive windstorm, blew a lot of shingles off houses. At school, they had to talk to us about this horrible thing that happened in Oklahoma City, this bombing that killed a lot of people, including kids. And I was just thinking, like, what kind of day is this? It's like, there's never been a day like this in my life. What is going on in this world? And with regards to the man who was blamed for Oklahoma City, Timothy McVeigh, and his accomplice, Terry Nichols, Timothy McVeigh was former CIA. And again, remember, Ignatius of Loyola equals 201. He's the founder of the Jesuits. April 19th is his day. The Jesuit order equates to 201. Well, go figure. Timothy McVeigh equates to 201. Go figure. His accomplice, Terry Lynn Nichols, equates to 201. They were supposedly radicalized in Arkansas. That's where Bill Clinton was from, the president at the time, at a white supremacist camp. And the man who radicalized him, if you look him up, you'll see they use his middle initial. His name was Richard G. Millar, which equals 201, including that middle initial, just like how you'll see it if you look it up. I'm not adding the G in there just to make it 201. That's the way his name goes down in the history books, like Dwight D. Eisenhower. But also, that same day, Richard Snell was put to death in Oklahoma City, and he supposedly tried to blow up the same building in 83, which is interesting because Oklahoma City, Oklahoma's on the 83rd meridian, and the song Murder by Numbers, where killing's the sport of the elected, and it's as simple as ABC is 1, 2, 3. That song came out in 83. Go figure, the word murder equals 83. But Richard Snell was put to death by the state that exact same day. And if you look into it, they say that all day before he was executed, he was calling out that they were going to blow up the Oklahoma City building that day. He was calling that out before it happened. So if only we could, dig him up from the grave and talk more to him. How did he know that? What did he know? What was he connected to? So many mysteries of April 19th, 95, including what happened to the police officer who blew the whistle on it, Terrence Yankee, who was found bound and beaten and stabbed to death, yet the authorities said his death was a suicide. But with regards to Timothy McVeigh and all the 201s, there's even more. It happened on a Wednesday, and Wednesday is named after Mercury. Mercury is the trickster. He was driving in a Mercury Marquis. Mercury Marquis equals 201. And they say they would have never caught Timothy McVeigh, but his Mercury Marquis had the license plate blown off it from the explosion. The car was untouched except for somehow the explosion knocked off the license plate. That's the authorities' story. And with regards to Timothy McVeigh eventually being put to death at age 33, just like how David Koresh was killed at age 33 on April 19th, which is what Timothy McVeigh said he was avenging. Timothy McVeigh was put to death at age 33, 3 months before 9/11. That was the day that the Twin Towers, or those two towers, became zero before they were eventually rebuilt as one World Trade Center. 201. And if you look into Jesuit Georgetown's motto, it's both into one. Both into one. Kind of reminds you of the Twin Towers becoming the one World Trade Center. But again, he was in a Mercury Marquis. It was a Wednesday named after Mercury. If you look at the periodic table, the only element that's even close to the number 201 is Mercury. It's just, it would round up to 201 if you want to look it up, but it's funny enough, the only element anywhere near 201. Now, Oklahoma City, other things that were really interesting about that day. Joe Biden had just helped spearhead the nation passing the first counterterrorism legislation in the history of the U.S. And it passed on February 10th of that year, which was Governor Keating's birthday. The governor of Oklahoma at the time was Governor Keating. He was Jesuit educated. He went to Georgetown, just like Bill Clinton. Of course, Joe Biden, Jesuit educated as well, from the town of Scranton, where one of the nation's 27 Jesuit universities is. And Scranton's mostly associated with The Office, the hit show on NBC with Steve Carell. If you never noticed, The Office ran 201 episodes, and the vast majority of those episodes, you can see the Jesuit prep school flag, Scranton University's flag, in the broadcast if you're paying attention. 201 episodes of The Office. You might recall also recently the Kings Road killings at University of Idaho, and they tracked the killer all the way back to Scranton, Pennsylvania. And if you go back and look at that story, they'll tell you that that killer lived in apartment 201. Again, there's just so many examples, but you pay attention to this number, you start to see that there's definitely something going on. And I hope that something is becoming more and more clear as we move through this broadcast. But yes, Joe Biden passed the nation's first counterterrorism legislation February 10th on Frank Keating's birthday. And funny enough, the phrase counterterrorism equates to 201. Counterterrorism 201. Then this massive 201 ritual 68 days later. And it matters that it was 68 days later because in Gematria, the word terror equals 68. Terror 68. It goes with why in 1968, the year 68, World Trade Center construction began in New York. 911 was made the national emergency dialing code. George W. Bush graduated from Yale in Skull and Bones. The lead hijacker on 9/11, the lead of the 19 hijackers, was born in that year. Not to mention the Quran code was discovered in 1968. 2001: A Space Odyssey came out. Planet of the Apes came out, a movie where the character discovers in the end he's in a destroyed New York that he can't even recognize. The New York Jets had their only Super Bowl winning season. Fast forward to 9/11. 9/11 Patriot Act, and then all of a sudden the Patriots are the greatest team in football history, with Tom Brady born 201 years after the Illuminati and this nation, married to Giselle, born on the 201st day of the year. If you go back, you can see that ESPN wrote an article called The Road to 201. The Road to 201. And it's about how Tom Brady got his 201st career win over the St. Louis Rams, which is noteworthy because in football history, American football history, the first forward pass, what the quarterback position does, the first forward pass is credited to St. Louis University, the Jesuit school. You look at the last Super Bowl Tom Brady won, Super Bowl 55, when he went down to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and every single pro team in Tampa went to a championship that year because it's all a big script. But you look at Tom Brady's box score, you'll even see that he had 201 passing yards. And that stuff happens all the time if you're paying attention. You know, I was living in Seattle when the Seahawks won their only Super Bowl in Super Bowl 48. That's the 206 area code, Russell Wilson with the 206 passing yards. And speaking of 201, William Henry Gates is Mr. 201 in Seattle. That's Bill Gates. He was the main co-sponsor of Event 201, which again was the coronavirus pandemic simulation just before the whole thing unfolded. And he was still with Melinda Gates at the time, who has the same birthday as the Jesuit order, August 15th, and who comes from a family of Jesuit priests. Okay, so yeah, that was a more recent event in history, the massive 201 with the Oklahoma City bombing. Timothy McVeigh put to death 3 months before 9/11 at age 33, where then the World Trade Centers were destroyed 33 years after 1968 when their construction began. Again, 2 towers became 0 before they became 1. Something else I should mention about Joe Biden. Joe Biden, when he lost his son, Beau Biden, he was 72 years old. In 1972, he became senator-elect. And just days after becoming senator-elect, his wife and daughter died in a car crash. Dead in a car crash, his wife and daughter. And they died on Limestone Road. And go figure that in Gematria, Limestone Road equates to 201. And the pyramids are made out of limestone, going with Great Pyramid of Giza 201. And there being 201 remaining layers of stone. Also, in light of how Joe Biden met with Putin on Pearl Harbor Day, 201 days after the Jesuit nation year began. From the day that Joe Biden was born until the day that Hawaii became a state, that was 201 months later. 201 months from Joe Biden's birthday to Hawaii becoming a state. And you might recall last summer, Hawaii, Maui, was devastated with the unprecedented fires that rapidly spread, killed many, destroyed Lahaina, the old capital. If you missed the sick joke, they waited 13 days until August 21st, which was Hawaii's 64th birthday as a state, to have Joe Biden go there and speak. It was Hawaii's 64th birthday as a state. Again, 13 days later. It matters because in Gematria, Maui equals 64, Joe Biden equals 64, Barack Hussein Obama equals 64, of course, who Joe Biden first took the Oval Office with. And with regards to the 13 part, well, we all know where it fits in with America or the US, but if you don't know the history, Hawaii was overthrown by a political faction within the United States that referred to itself as the Committee of 13. And you want to get even more interesting with the thoughts about what happened to Hawaii? Well, I'd suggest you go back and read the many posts on my website, GematriaEffectNews, because I have a lot of posts on Hawaii. There's a lot to say, actually, about it. But one of the more interesting things is Hawaii, not too far from Japan, burned up between the anniversary dates of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which are August 6th and August 9th. In fact, Hawaii burned August 8th and August 9th, so it finished burning on the anniversary of the Nagasaki bombing. But Hawaii was also made the 808 area code on August 8th in history. August 8th, it became the 808. And when you think of Hawaii, you think of the 50th state. You might recall that it burned up the week of hip-hop's 50th anniversary, and it matters because hip-hop music was born on the 808 drum machine, which came out of Japan. And, of course, the rapper that claims Chicago as his home, kind of like Obama, who got famous at the same time, at the same time Obama was getting famous, is the same time Kanye West was getting famous. But Kanye West has that album, 808 and Heartbreaks. So I'm tossing in some of these things to remind people that numbers are so important. The fourth book of the Bible is titled Numbers. This podcast is really focused on 201. But I want people to understand there's a lot more numbers than just 201. 201 is a very important number. But literally every number has a meaning in this language. And again, 64th birthday, who better to have there than the president, Joe Biden, 64. And it's a number that should remind you of the spaces on the chessboard, 64 spaces on the chessboard. Who's making big moves? You know, who's going to come back and claim that area in Lahaina for pennies on the dollar, you know? Don't forget, the Illuminati was founded May 1st, 1776, 64 days before this nation was established. And International Chess Day was created in Paris, France. And if you look up what day International Chess Day is, it's the 201st day of the year. You know, so who's playing chess on this level? The ones in the light who refer to themselves as the Illuminati. In case someone thinks I'm just picking on Joe Biden, understand it's no different with Donald Trump. Donald Trump, like I said, he recently lost his brother on August 15th, the Jesuit order's birthday. He recently lost his sister, who was part of the Reagan administration, on the same day Donald Trump Jr. appeared in court. And mind you, Donald Trump Jr. was born on the 201st day of Trump's age, his first child. His mother was buried July 20th, 2022, the 201st day of the year. And that was 6 days after she fell down the stairs on July 14th, which was exactly 60 weeks into the first ever Jesuit nation year. And earlier in that day, before she fell down the stairs, there were two stories related to Trump. The first was that he hinted he would be running for the 60th U.S. presidential election, which takes place later this year on November 5th, 2024, Guy Fawkes Day. And the second story that emerged that day before she fell down the stairs is that there was a case by conservatives against Trump based on 60 legal cases. By the way, in Gematria, Donald Trump equals 60. Also, the word order itself equals 60. And if you look into the Jesuits, they were originally composed as an order of 60 members. 60. Okay, as I look at my list, those really were the main points I wanted to make on this broadcast. If you're more interested in this subject, I'd recommend you look into my blog or my website, GematriaEffect.news. There's a lot of posts on there about 201. If you just use the search bar and search 201, you'll be reading for a real long time. There's so many rituals with this 201 number. You know, we probably touched on some of the more important ones in history, no doubt, in this stream. But in terms of what's been documented, we probably touched on maybe 2 or 3% of everything that I've written about and covered to date. And I do also have a book out there. I have a couple books out there. Number Games by Zachary K. Hubbard and Letters and Numbers by Zachary K. Hubbard. You can get those books in paper form on, everybody's favorite retailer. I won't even mention their name, the thing taking over the world. You can also get them in ebook form from my website, or if you want them for free, if you search Zachary K. Hubbard Subscribe Star. I made a Subscribe Star page. You don't have to subscribe to it. I just made it as a splash page. The only thing that you'll see when you go to it is 2 links to download both of my books. And if you have any ebook reader or even a PDF reader, you can read the books. So Number Games is the more recent book. Letters and Numbers is my first book. And Number Games is the one where I talk a lot more about 201. When I wrote Letters and Numbers, I wasn't really dialed into the 201 thing yet. I had not yet understood how important of a number it was. And yeah, I think that's good for this stream. I think that about covers it. I just looked up at the time. We're right under the 1 hour mark. And just for a little fun in the feedback department, just so you can hear them side by side. Again, we're in this competition. If you'd like to, by the way, if you'd like to submit an entry for the opening or even outro music for this program, send me an email, GematriaEffectNews@gmail.com. Happy to play your song, give you some promotion. And for the 2 people who made these, if you guys want me to promote a website or a place you put out more music, let me know. I'd be more than happy to do that. It only seems appropriate. But we'll play the first submission, which a lot of people like, and we'll play a more recent submission, which in a recent vote off on my YouTube page edged out the other song. But let's listen to it, or let's listen to both potential intros one more time. And then if you're out there and think you can do even better, we're all listening. But I'm grateful for both of these. I think they're both excellent. This was the first entry. We'll play it first, and then right after that, we'll play number 2. And you guys let me know. Send me a comment or an email. Are they the right choices? Here we go. That was the first submission. And then we did open the show at the second. We'll play it one more time. And just to remind people also before we play it, there are more numbers than 201. When Benjamin Netanyahu came back on 1229, again, the 201st prime, corresponding with the state of Israel equaling 201, and him departing when he stepped down momentarily on June 13th, the day leaving 201 days left in the year, which is also the day in history that the U.S. created its military war propaganda department. After he returned on 1229, you ended up having the war start in Israel on October 7th, which was 282 days after Netanyahu's return. And his name in Gematria, Benjamin Netanyahu, equates to 282. So just emphasizing that point about how numbers behind words are used as rituals. 201's a real big one, but there's other numbers out there that also have important meaning. All right. Now, right where we started, the newest intro song voted recently #1 by the community. Let me know if you still think this is #1, or if you're out there and you think you can do better, or even if you made this song and you got a better version of it. Here it is.
You are now listening to Zachary K. Tupper. Yeah. Time to wake up and learn the knowledge. Wake the fuck up, radio. Wake the fuck up, radio. Don't be messing with the knowledge, radio. Don't be hating on the knowledge, radio. Don't be trolling on the knowledge, trolls everywhere. Don't be fighting with the knowledge, radio. WTFU, wake the fuck up. WTFU, wake the fuck up. WTFU, wake the fuck up. Radio.
All right, True Seeker, we'll leave this broadcast there. Again, I need your feedback and your submissions to make it better. Till next time, everybody.